The moment when the masks you've carefully constructed over decades suddenly become suffocating is not a breakdown, it is the soul's deepest calling. This acute discomfort signals the initiation into individuation, Carl Jung's lifelong focus, the process of becoming a singular, whole, and authentic self. This is not clinical depression, it is a profound psychological emergency where your true self, the complete, authentic core, launches a revolt against a life built on borrowed expectations and the false safety of the persona, the social mask. Jung observed that this transformation isn't a single decision but a long, slow, and often agonizing shedding of patterns that once guaranteed social survival. These releases aren't initially conscious choices, they manifest as a visceral, allergic reaction to inauthenticity that grows stronger as your spiritual awareness clarifies. The profound truth is that you wake up one day not deciding to quit these behaviors, but realizing you already have, your soul simply won't let you participate anymore. 1. The desperate hunger for approval, quitting the external mirror. The first fortress to crumble is the need for external validation. This release is not an act of defiance, but a radical structural shift within the psyche. The psychological mechanism, the ego, which thrives on social affirmation, is slowly subordinated to the self. The self is inherently complete, it possesses its own gravity and integrity and requires no external likes or praise to justify its existence. The visceral manifestation, the body becomes an alarm system. Jung meticulously documented how patients reported a strange physical discomfort, a sudden nausea, chest tightness, or a sensation of the words for the performance getting stuck in the throat, when attempting to perform for approval. The soul applies an emergency brake. The emerging virtue, as the addiction to the external mirror dies, inner authority is birthed. This is not confidence, which still references the audience, but inherent worth, an unshakable core that points true regardless of the world's opinion. 2. The compulsion to be special, embracing the ordinary. Early in the awakening process, the ego can seize the new spiritual awareness and generate spiritual inflation, leading to the subtle arrogance of feeling superior or more conscious. This subtle pretense must be surrendered. The psychological mechanism, the compulsion to use spiritual knowledge, synchronicity, or practice to differentiate yourself begins to feel like a lead weight, a performance that is exhausting and fundamentally false. You realize you are using spirituality as a mere strategy for ego elevation. The manifestation, you lose interest in comparing meditation hours or consciousness levels. The desire to drop hints or subtly correct others dissipates. You become deeply comfortable with being seen as ordinary. The emerging virtue, this surrender enables individuation without inflation. You become truly unique not by trying to stand out, but by simply being fully yourself. Your authentic nature, stripped of the need for performance, distinguishes itself naturally. You become like a flower blooming for its own sake. 3. The performance of happiness, integrating the shadow. Genuine spiritual depth makes you perpetually real, which includes the full, rich, and messy spectrum of human emotion. You quit the cultural and spiritual pressure to be perpetually positive, enlightened, or above human suffering. The psychological mechanism, this constant forced positivity is a form of spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts, like everything is perfect, to avoid the psychological work of processing grief, anger, or fear. The soul demands full embodiment, human and spiritual, light and shadow. The manifestation, you stop forcing smiles or spouting affirmations when turmoil is present. You permit yourself to be genuinely disappointed or sad. The moment you stop trying to be the wise one, you become capable of holding authentic space for another's suffering, and your own. The emerging virtue, the integration of the shadow begins. You realize that healing is not about transcending your humanity but about embracing it fully. This deep realism is the prerequisite for genuine, unforced joy. 4. The desperate need for certainty, finding peace in mystery. The mind spends a lifetime collecting certainties. I know who I am, I know what is true, I know my purpose, as a protective psychological armor. These fixed points must dissolve for true expansion. The psychological mechanism, As consciousness expands, you realize that the demand for certainty is a strategy of the ego to avoid the terror of the unknown. True growth leads not to a collection of answers, but to a profound peace with mystery. The manifestation, long-held opinions about spirituality, politics, and life's mechanics begin to crack. Every time you try to crystallize a truth, it dissolves into a deeper question. This period, which can feel like agonizing confusion, is Jung's cloud of unknowing. The emerging virtue, the capacity to hold paradox, emerges. You learn to act decisively without being certain and to commit fully while remaining open to being completely wrong. Wisdom is found in recognizing that reality is too alive to be caged by any mental model. 5. The habit of blame, and the victim narrative reclaiming power. The hardest surrender is quitting the entire victim-perpetrator narrative, the story the ego uses to explain suffering and preserve its own innocence. The psychological mechanism, this is the core work of reclaiming power. You move from rage at unfairness to recognition of unconscious patterns, the ways you participate in your own drama, to finally, radical responsibility. This is not about excusing harm, but about realizing that holding on to blame is your choice to avoid your own authorship over your experience. The manifestation, you stop using another person's wrongness as an excuse for your stagnation. You begin to see others, even those who wounded you, not as monsters, but as other wounded humans doing their best with their own trauma. The emerging virtue, true liberation, is found in realizing that even your wounds served your awakening. You transcend the victim identity and become the author of your own experience. 6. The fear of conflict and boundary setting, establishing sacred integrity. Many are conditioned to believe that spiritual living means being perpetually peaceful, avoiding friction, and maintaining harmony at all costs. You quit this false peace. The psychological mechanism, you realize that genuine love and spiritual integrity require boundaries. The inability to say no or engage in constructive conflict is a sacrifice of the self for the comfort of others, a high spiritual price. The manifestation, you stop sacrificing your inner truth to maintain external harmony. You learn to articulate your needs and to tolerate the discomfort of another person's temporary disappointment or anger. The emerging virtue, this quit establishes the sacred integrity of the self. Your life becomes an act of truth, and you learn that healthy conflict is a necessary force for growth, clarity, and true intimacy. 7. The illusion of control, moving from force to flow. The ego spends a tremendous amount of energy trying to manage every outcome, from others' perceptions to future events. You quit this exhausting effort. The psychological mechanism, spiritual awakening, reveals the fundamental uncontrollability of existence. Control is revealed to be the root of anxiety. You shift from trying to make things happen to allowing things to unfold with deep inner trust. The manifestation, the constant low-level humming of anxiety, begins to subside. You still plan and act with intention, but the emotional investment in manipulating every variable is released. The emerging virtue, the profound, restful presence of acceptance, replaces the frantic effort of control. This is not apathy. It is the deep, spiritual certainty that life is working through you, not against you. 8. Attachment to outcomes, embracing intention without demand. This is a deeper layer of the surrender of control, moving from controlling the process to controlling the result. You quit the psychological addiction to a specific, fixed result. The psychological mechanism, while you act with full effort and intention, the emotional investment in how it must turn out is released. Jung noted that the individuated person operates with an attitude of doing the right thing and letting go of the rest. The manifestation, you can lose a job, an opportunity, or a relationship and feel the appropriate human grief without your entire sense of self being shattered, because your worth was not staked on the outcome. The emerging virtue, this release frees up the vast energy previously spent on worry and what if. It cultivates emotional resilience and allows for a greater flow and adaptability in action, enabling you to recognize that the actual outcome is often more beneficial than the planned one. 9. The need to convert or save others, honoring sacred timing. Early awakening often comes with a burst of missionary zeal, the urgent impulse to correct, teach, or convince those who are still asleep. You quit this subtle arrogance. The psychological mechanism, the need to convert others, is a projection. It's the ego's desire to validate its own experience by having others conform to its new truth. You realize that every soul is on its own sacred schedule. The manifestation, the urge to preach, correct, or judge others' unconsciousness dissolves. You stop viewing others with pity and start engaging them with genuine compassion and reverence for their unique journey. The emerging virtue, the most powerful form of service, becomes living your truth, becoming a walking example, not a preaching teacher. You honor the sacred timing of others' growth, realizing that they will wake up when they are ready, not when you think they should. 10. The isolation of awakening, cultivating conscious community. The final quit is the surrender of the isolation of awakening. The belief that I am too conscious to connect with others is a spiritual defense mechanism protecting against the vulnerability of intimacy. The psychological mechanism, this isolation is rooted in spiritual pride and a deep-seated fear of being seen in your own humanity and non-enlightened moments. Spiritual maturity leads back to connection, but of a completely new quality. The manifestation, you quit the need to stand apart and are able to be fully present with anyone, without judgment, because you recognize your own unconscious patterns in theirs. The emerging virtue, you cultivate conscious relationship, the ability to connect without merging, to love without attachment, and to share truth without preaching. You are learning to be fully self-contained and fully present, creating a conscious community, a rare and precious meeting of the awake. 11. The addiction to drama and reactivity. You quit the constant need for high-intensity emotional events and the impulsive, immediate reaction to every external stimulus. The psychological mechanism, the ego often maintains a sense of self-importance by dwelling in chaos and emotional reactivity. Being constantly put upon or fighting a battle can feel like being central to life. Awakening introduces a space between stimulus and response, the true locus of freedom. The manifestation, you find the urge to immediately text back, escalate an argument, or indulge in gossip simply disappears. You recognize the energetic drag of drama and recoil from it. Silence becomes more compelling than the need to have the last word. The emerging virtue, this surrender cultivates psychological stillness and emotional sovereignty. You operate from a place of response rather than reaction, reclaiming the energy previously consumed by external chaos. 12. The tyranny of busyness and exhaustion. You quit the cultural mandate that your worth is tied to your productivity or the visible fullness of your schedule. The psychological mechanism, busyness often serves as an escape mechanism, a way to avoid self-reflection, deep emotion, or facing the anxiety of existence. It's a defense against stillness. The individuating soul realizes that its purpose is not to do more, but to be more. The manifestation, you find yourself actively pruning your calendar and setting aside dedicated time for simple non-doing. The badge of, "I'm so busy," loses its appeal and is replaced by the quiet pride of having time for the soul. The emerging virtue, this release creates sacred space for contemplation and creative flow. You begin to measure your life not by tasks accomplished, but by the quality of your presence in each moment. 13. The pursuit of perfect timing or conditions. You quit the paralyzing procrastination that demands every condition be flawless, the "I'll start when" excuse for inaction. The psychological mechanism, the search for perfection, is a disguised fear of failure or criticism. It is a defense against the messiness of actual creation or real life. The ego waits for the cosmic green light, but the self understands that now is the only time. The manifestation, you find yourself starting projects, relationships, or healing before you feel completely ready. You embrace the "good enough" principle, realizing that movement and learning are more valuable than immaculate stagnation. The emerging virtue, this surrender cultivates courageous action and resilience. You learn that wholeness is not about being flawless, but about fully engaging with life as it is, imperfections and all. 14. Nostalgia for a better past or idealized future. You quit the habitual dwelling in regret over the past or the constant deferral of happiness to a mythical future state. The psychological mechanism. Both nostalgia and wishful thinking are strategies for escaping the challenging reality of the present moment. The ego uses the past as a comparative weapon, I used to be, or the future as a bribe, I'll be happy when. Awakening is an uncompromising demand for presence. The manifestation, you catch yourself in a loop of, if only. Or, I can't wait until. And a quiet inner voice simply calls you back to right now. The emotional charge around old stories of regret or future fantasies begins to neutralize. The emerging virtue, you gain access to the eternal present. Happiness is no longer a destination you're racing toward, but the ground you are standing on. You honor the past for the lessons it holds but refuse to live there. 15. The fear of not knowing enough, intellectual armoring. You quit the constant urge to acquire more knowledge, to read one more book, attend one more lecture, or seek one more spiritual technique, before living fully. The psychological mechanism. This is the ultimate intellectual defense, using knowledge as a form of spiritual bypassing or psychic hoarding. The ego believes that if it just knows enough, it will finally be safe, enlightened, or able to skip the uncomfortable parts of the journey. The manifestation, you stop reading self-help or spiritual books compulsively. You stop seeking the next teacher or technique. You realize that the wisdom you sought externally is already embodied within you. The urge shifts from reading about life to living the reading. The emerging virtue, this surrender results in embodied wisdom. You move from the head to the heart and gut, trusting your internal, felt experience as the truest guide, recognizing that the deepest knowledge is not something acquired, but something uncovered from within. 16. The desire for a simple, linear life. You quit the expectation that the spiritual journey leads to a calm, predictable, or straight path. The psychological mechanism. The ego yearns for order and seeks a spiritual path that promises a one-time fix or an end to suffering. The individuated self, however, embraces the spiral nature of growth, the constant return to old themes at a higher level of awareness. You realize wholeness requires the integration of opposites, light and darkness, order and chaos. The manifestation, you stop being frustrated when old wounds resurface or when a period of peace is followed by turmoil. You begin to understand these regressions not as failure, but as opportunities for deeper integration. You cease asking, why is this happening to me again, and instead ask, why is this happening for me now? The emerging virtue, this surrender cultivates psychological humility and existential resilience. You accept that the journey is one of continuous becoming, where complexity and challenge are signs of life, not obstacles to be eliminated. 17. Identifying with the inner critic, the superego. You quit the voice of harsh, relentless self-judgment that has served as an internalized warden since childhood. The psychological mechanism, the inner critic, often identified with the superego, is an introject authority, the voice of parental, cultural, and religious laws. It kept you compliant but small. As the self gains authority, you recognize the critic not as truth, but as a complex, a fragmented part of the psyche that can be observed and disidentified from. The manifestation, you begin to hear the criticizing voice and instinctively take a step back, realizing, that's a thought, not a fact. You stop reflexively punishing yourself for mistakes. This often manifests as a deep, subtle shift in posture and breathing, a physical release from chronic self-tension. The emerging virtue, you cultivate radical self-compassion and inner warmth. The energy once used for self-policing is redirected toward creative, purposeful living. The relationship with yourself moves from being a judge to being an ally. 18. The need for everything to be deep or profound. You quit the spiritual pressure to make every moment, conversation, and experience intellectually or mystically significant. The psychological mechanism. This is the spiritualized ego's final grab for specialness, demanding a constant state of elevated, profound experience. It rejects the mundane, the surface level, and the light-hearted as unconscious. True awakening, however, integrates the transcendent with the immanent, the immediate, earthly reality. The manifestation, you find profound joy in simple, ordinary acts, making coffee, watching a cloud, having a silly conversation. You can engage with surface topics, like sports or TV, without feeling spiritually superior or bored. The need to turn every moment into a philosophical treatise dissolves. The emerging virtue, you achieve groundedness and spiritual lightness. You realize that the sacred is not reserved for the mountaintop, but permeates the ordinary. Every breath is profound precisely because it is simple and present. 19. The rigid adherence to a single spiritual system or identity. You quit the need to define yourself strictly by one path, dogma, or label, e.g., I am a Buddhist, I am an atheist, I am a Jungian. The psychological mechanism, the adoption of a single, rigid system is another form of certainty-seeking and a collective identity that prevents true individuation. As the self expands, it naturally draws wisdom from all sources, mythology, science, art, religion, without needing to commit exclusively to one banner. The manifestation, you become a spiritual omnivore, appreciating the truth in disparate teachings without feeling compelled to reconcile them. The impulse to defend your label against others' labels fades. You realize the map, the dogma, is not the territory, the ultimate truth. The emerging virtue, this grants psychological freedom and universal perspective. Your identity shifts from being defined by a set of beliefs to being defined by your own inner experience and direct knowing. 20. The separation between body and spirit. You quit the pervasive dualism that views the physical body, practical matters, and earthly desire as antithetical to spiritual growth. The psychological mechanism, historically, many spiritual paths have encouraged an escape from the body, viewing it as a mere container or source of sin. Jungian depth psychology insists on the wholeness of the person. You realize that the body is not an obstacle to transcendence, but the very vehicle through which consciousness experiences itself. The manifestation, you move from treating the body as a machine to be optimized or a problem to be controlled, to treating it as a temple and a source of wisdom. You honor its messages, fatigue, pleasure, intuition, as integral spiritual data. The line between your meditation practice and your daily chores blurs. The emerging virtue, this culmination leads to full embodied integration. You are not a spirit in a body, but a unified psychisoma. Your highest spiritual practice becomes the conscious living of your ordinary, physical life.